We're building an animal enclosure.
For these little guys, marmosets.
Because of new UK laws, you actually need a licence now to keep monkeys. That means there's going to be 10,000 monkeys without homes.
And that brings us here to Fripp's farm. You bastards.
And they're one of the few that can actually house the monkeys.
We've never built one before, so we're going to have to do a bit of research before building it.
With our research complete, it was time to put in an order with MGN Builders Merchants. So they got our materials delivered on site, and with those on site we could start marking out for where we're going to be putting the enclosure. The way we did that is to cut up some spikes, put them in the floor and pull a load of string lines, which is going to mark out for our back walls, side walls, and even the outside enclosure itself. So this is going to be made up of two parts, an inside and an outside. We now need to get our lines square, so I'm going to be using the old 3-4-5 method, which I'll show you, and this is the most important section. So using that 3-4-5 method, we square up our first two string lines, so they've been pulled to the correct length and width. So now we set them completely square, and that's going to allow us to parallel the other two walls off of that, giving us a completely square boundary for where our building and outside enclosure is going to be. Once the lines are pulled in, we do one more check, checking our diagonals just to make sure it's absolutely perfect. Lines are all set, everything's square. The first thing I did was to find the highest spot, which is over here, set our laser level, and now we're going to dig in some blocks.
We're going to use our shovel. First day, mate.
Even though we had a higher spot, the ground here is actually quite level. We made sure of that before picking it to put our enclosure, but there is some small discrepancies. We're now putting a little bed of postcrete underneath so we can set our block to the correct level. It's also going to prevent them from moving around when we put our building on top. Yep, the farm is clearly affecting my mental stability. While Jack's digging out for the ones on the corners, I'm going to measure out for the other blocks. We're having a total of 12 blocks on this build, so we space them out equally, making sure there's going to be enough support for our walls, and then we set them in using that postcrete and our laser level. So that's just going to make sure everything's completely flat and true when we come to build our walls and sit them on top. So Brad and Jack got the brunt of the work while I double checked everything was done correctly before wetting up that postcrete so it could set. Now that our four corners are set in, we're going to add some extra blocks around the edge. On the shorter walls, I marked the centres because we was going to add one more block there, but on the slightly longer walls, I actually split it into two because there's going to be two extra blocks along those walls. Brad and Jack then got them dug out, and it was time to start filling them up with that postcrete and making sure everything is completely flat with the four corners we had already set in place. And we're doing that using the same method, a level and a laser level.
As we're installing the concrete blocks, we're using this string line, so when we put our base plate on, it's going to stay completely straight.
And being straight is more important than the spacings themselves.
That is the rest of the blocks in place. We're going to water them so they grow.
Brad clearly misunderstands the purpose of the water. It's not so they grow, it's so that they set. That's all of our blocks in position, so that now means we can move on to actually building the walls. And that starts with us measuring for our bottom and top plates of each side.
It's really coming together now.
Agree to disagree, Jack? I think we've only just started. So with the bottom and top plates cut, I lay them into position, ready for the studs. That is our top and bottom plates for our walls. So basically the sole plate, which is this, and this is going to go up top, which will be our top plate. They're all cut. Now we're going to cut our studs, but unlike our normal garden rooms, this is actually going to have a taller front wall and the rest are going to be shorter. And that front wall is the complete opposite wall to what I just showed you, so I'm not sure what I was pointing at there. But we get all of our studs cut down to length. I then cut a 355mm spacer to set out the rest of our studs. And that's just going to save us having to measure and mark everything. That is our first wall built. You will notice a large opening in the middle. That is because that is how we enter the building.
It got really dark last night and we're going to keep going, but we have someone special just turned up. It's Chris.
It's the unhelpful tradesman.
But we've got to be careful because the whole video, them goose have been absolutely attacking us. Look, Chris is ready for it. Go get him, Chris.
I'll try and stroke one.
We're now going to get on with building 2 more walls, and we're actually going to leave one of them off. The unhelpful tradesman then helped me lay out for the rest of the studs on the walls.
Put him in our wizard, Harry.
Chris is go.
Abracadabra!
We tried our best at magic, but unfortunately none of it worked, so we had to go back to the old-fashioned way of doing it all by hand. We're actually adding little corner details to 2 of the walls, and that is because we're going to be putting OSB on the inside of this building, so not plasterboard like we normally do, and that is so we can fully enclose the inside for the monkeys.
Now we're going to apply the DPC to the bottom of the 3 walls.
He may be the unhelpful tradesman, but you can't knock him for his absolute enthusiasm for the most basic of jobs. So like Chris said, it was time to get on our DPC to the bottom of our plates, and that's going to stop any moisture trapping into that timber.
That is all the DPC installed. Now it's time to assemble the walls.
At this stage, it's like a gigantic Meccano set. You just need to slide all of the pieces together, and then we put some nails into the corners to hold everything nice and tight. And that is the 3 corners of our building erected. That is 3 of our walls up, so this is the main entrance here, and then there's the 2 back walls. This one we've left out, and that is because we're going to build our floor and walk it straight in. And that was nice and simple using 4x2 treated timber.
Now that's the main frame built for the floor, we're going to add some noggins.
We had our noggins in at 1200mm from inside the plate normally, but on this we're doing it outside because there's no electrics going in it, so it doesn't really matter where they go. Now we're going to put a DPM on the bottom of our floor. This DPM is super important because obviously we don't want any moisture coming up into the building and making the monkeys all chilly at night. So we get this on, and that's going to protect our timber from any sort of rot, and it's also going to help prevent any moisture getting up into the room where they're going to be staying. So with the DPM added, we flip it over and slide it into that building, and now you can see why we left off that front wall. This just makes everything a lot easier and a lot quicker. So with it in place, I'll nail it down to that bottom plate, and that is our floor installed. Floor is in. The reason we are doing this is because we're actually going to be insulating the floor, because obviously we need to keep as much heat in here as possible once it's built. But now this is in, we're going to move on to putting on our front wall. Like our main wall, this one is also going to be having an entrance, and that is going to allow people to get from the inside to the outside section of the enclosure, including the monkeys themselves. Breaking news! We was hoping for a white Christmas, but instead we got a wet and windy one. But we'll take it. Who doesn't love a bit of sideways rain? So with the weather encroaching, we got on with installing that front wall, and it's pretty much the same as the rest. I've just borrowed my nan's ladders, and now we're going to put on our second top plate. So we're going to do that all the way around, making sure we lap the corners on the lower walls. Don't tell my nan, she doesn't know I've got these ladders. So with the ladders in place, I'll get that second top plate all nailed down with the nail gun.
And while Phil is fixing that last top plate on, I'd like you to subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free to keep making awesome content like this.
And while you're getting something for absolutely free, I got the last top plate installed.
That is the top plate complete. Now it's time to install some noggins on the building. And my little top tip is always measure the bottom, not the middle.
Wow, I wonder where you got that tip from. So with Brad's top tip dished out, we get on with marking out for our noggins. And the reason we measure the bottom, just in case you didn't know, is because you get bows in the wood and you can get a false reading when measuring for your noggins. That is all of our noggins installed. And I also want to show you a little star of the show. No one gets to see this. Don't look right at it because you'll be blind. But this is our Unilight tripod. And if you want one, we've got a code, 325. Cut to when it's sunny again. It's not sunny, but at least it's daylight. Next job is to brace our walls. So we're going to put some diagonal bracing on the outside, and that's going to square up our building, plumb it all up, so we can start installing our OSB.
It is sunny.
It's not sunny.
It's sunny.
Squinting, Brad, does not make it sunny.
Spot on.
With the wall spot on plumb, we nail in our diagonal bracing. Quiet on set. Very obedient ducks.
That was quacking delicious.
Sorry guys, you may hear the occasional dad joke. It's not our fault, we're just all a bit quackers. I've skipped a step for some reason, my mind. We've actually got to frame out our doorways first because these ain't actually finished. And also we've got some little windows going in. So let's do that now. Before you attack me for forgetting, don't forget we filmed this and I could have edited it out, but I was just nice and honest with you. So at least give me praise for that. So after forgetting to frame out the doors and all the windows, we get on with doing just exactly that. And I start off with the doors, setting in the top plate. So that's going to set the height of our doors using these jacks. And what these are going to do is help transfer any weight from our opening back down to the floor. So we get our top plate and then we add in some extra studs above before moving on to the first of 3 windows. And these are important because we need a lot of light and they also need access to the building. That is window 1 of 3 done. So whenever you're cutting out an opening, such as this little one here, just remember the weight from the roof, which is this here, needs to be transferred back down. So that's why we've got these little jacks underneath the window. Wow, thanks Phil for repeating exactly what I've already just said. So now that you know how they work, let's get the other 2 installed.
And while Phil's framing the rest of that window, me and Jack are over here cutting the OSB down to the correct height.
While that may not seem like a big task, leaving these pair to do anything unsupervised is always going to be risky. So I'm looking forward to seeing whether they actually fit when we come to install them. But while I'm trusting them to do that, I'll get on with finishing the framing for this enclosure.
The framing of the walls is complete. We're going to move on and install some OSB.
So this may seem super backwards because we're putting the OSB inside rather than outside. But the reason we're doing that is to save materials, and it's also going to do the same job it does when it's on the outside. But now the monkeys can use it to be safe inside. You may have noticed that we've left our OSB a little bit long on the doorways. That is because I like to use a router to cut it back, which I'll do right now. At this stage I'd lost the bit I normally use, so I used a standard flush cutting bit which does the job. It just takes a little bit longer, but no matter what you won't get a better finish if you use a skill saw, but if you haven't got a router it will get the job done. With the boards on, we can now take off our temporary bracing. And that's because the boards are basically doing the same job. And if you do pull anything off and there's nails in it, always take them out. Because you probably won't tread on it, but I always do. OSB is complete for now. We've had a little bit of a disaster with the roof rafters. We've ordered the wrong size. So we're going to skip. Oh my God, no fighting! No fighting! So the OSB is complete. We was going to do the roof, but we've had a bit of a mismeasure and they're the wrong size, so we're going to swap them over. But for now, what we're going to skip onto is insulating the walls and getting it wrapped and cladded. With the Foxes put on a timeout, me and Jack grab an insulation saw. So this isn't just a standard saw, although you can use one of those. But I do highly recommend this because it cuts a treat. With them all cut down to our 400mm widths, we start stuffing it into all the spaces around our building. Again, this is all a little bit backwards to what you'd normally do, because you'd normally insulate from the inside.
That is all the insulation in the walls complete. we're going to move on and install the breathable membrane.
And it's the membrane that's going to create that watertight pocket that we need around our walls. So this is going to stop any water getting in while also being breathable. When
you're installing this stuff, you just got to make sure that you do it to the recommended line of overlap.
And to attach it to our wall, we're just going to be using a nice little handheld stapler. And it's just to hold it in place until we install our batons that you'll see going on in a moment.
Membrane completed it. Now it's time to put some batons on.
Wow, thanks Jack. So that's exactly what we did. We got some 25 by 50 millimeter batons installed using 63 millimeter nails, and we're nailing straight into the studs behind. We can see again, the felt is on, the batons are on to an extent. We've got a couple more to do. What we're going to do now is unwrap our Christmas present. Because Christmas is only in 2 days, I'm hoping this is something good.
What did you get, Phil? What did you get?
Oh, it's an empty box. I always wanted one of these. Do you know it's going to be a good day? How I know? Because... oh no, I've lost it again. I found it. I found my downward cutting spiral bit, and you're going to see why I like this bit so much. And then once you've watched me use it, if you want one, the link will be in the description below. Like I said previous, I used the flush cutter bit, but this is the one I normally use, and it is much faster.
And if you want one of these knives, we're like a crap version of QVC. They're really good.
They are good.
They are good.
You say crap version, I say good version, because what we use, we actually like. It's not just random rubbish. Just finishing off the batons now, which is basically just all the little pieces around the windows. And we're also going to be putting some just on the edges. Them, I'm not going to bother with them because we're doing horizontal. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If you was doing vertical cladding, you'd want to fill in those little spaces so it'd give you something to fix to. But because we're doing horizontal, it doesn't matter for us. So we get all of the pieces infilled, and don't forget we're using 63mm nails on this, not the 90s. And we nail into every stud behind, and we also go along the edges of any of our openings, including the bottom and that little window at the top. And that is all of the batons complete.
That is the batons complete. I want to do a massive shout out to George, who's got us a delivery here because we got the measurements wrong for the roof rafters. So big shout out to AC Recoveries. We're going to move on with installing the roof.
With Christmas right around the corner, nowhere was open. And lucky for us, AC Recoveries hooked us up by throwing all of the timber on the back of his recovery truck and dropping it off to us at the farm so we could get this roof installed and get the whole building watertight for when we leave to go and have our little Christmas celebrations. So we start setting in our 6x2s using a little spacer. Again, a much quicker method than measuring. Once we set in our first rafter or joist, what we do, we come off of that using a spacer. It's just a lot quicker, and we've actually adjusted our spacings ever so slightly so that we can get our OSB boards to fit full, because they're 2-4-40, not 2-4. We don't normally do this because we plasterboard the inside of our garden rooms, but with the enclosure we're not, so it allowed us to change the spacings. All of our rafters are on as far as we can go for now. What we're going to do next is to put on a front plate or a ring beam. You don't need to have a ring beam, but I am a fan of these because it gives you multiple fixing points when you come to do your fascias. With the back, what we're going to do is we've sailed them too long. We're not leaving it like this. We're going to mark it, pull a chalk line and cut them all down to our desired overhang, which isn't a lot on this building. So we measured out 100mm for the overhang on the back, remembering we've got a ring beam going on the top, so that's going to give us 150mm. So it's not a lot, but it's enough to get the water away from those walls. So we mark out with a chalk line and then cut them all off using the skill saw before nailing on the rest of that ring beam. And then we can move on to the small little ladder detail that goes on the sides and then cut off any excess using the skill saw again.
Head, shoulders, knees and toes, hips and nose, hips and nose.
New kid songs, isn't it? Absolutely ruined the classical. I will take every opportunity I get to show you my singing voice.
So we're over this side of the roof, we're adding some extra bracing in, and that's to pick up the bit of wall that drops down in the roof.
It's not for the bit of roof that drops either, by the way.
What is it for?
It's for this little sliver that we've created. Builder / teacher constantly.
That is all the roof rafters installed. Now it's time to move on and put some noggins in.
So the noggins are going to help keep all of our rafters nice and straight. So we get those installed. Remember, we've already got our sizes because we used a spacer to set them out. Next job is to put on our 18mm OSB, and that's going up on top. Brad starts to slide on the sheets, and then I jump up on top to start nailing it down using the 63mm nails. And because we set out those rafters or those joists to take a full board, everything falls perfectly. We will have to cut the opposite board though, because we need to lap them. You can only get one side, but it is what it is. And the way I do that is to measure it up on the roof, ping a chalk line, and use my skill saw to cut it in position. I just find it's a lot quicker than doing it on the floor.
Could be a little bit more delicate with that.
They was definitely trying to kill me the way they was throwing those boards up on the roof, but I just made sure I stayed well clear. So with the main boards installed, I start cutting up all the smaller pieces to go into all of the little gaps, and I do the same thing. I cut it all up on the roof. It's just a lot quicker to do everything while you're there rather than measuring and going back down.
It's so cold here. Our hands are freezing. That's not why I want to wear them. I want to wear them because they look so good. Man.
You cannot deny how cool I look in these gloves. So I practice my waving with my brand new warm gloves before moving on to cutting in the last sections of the OSB that are going on our roof. With everything installed, I get out my downward cutting spiral bit and I just trim around the whole edge. You don't have to do this, you can use a skill saw, but this just makes sure you've got a perfectly smooth edge with all of your OSB. And then we get out the blower to clear all of the dust. And that is the OSB complete. Now that the roof's sat like that, what we're going to do is put some fascias on. So this is just some 1x7 pine, and that is going to wrap around that face on the building. Technically, you don't need to do this step because the boards are already treated behind, but this is going to give a lot nicer of a look when we come to cladding it. That way we can treat it all with a bit of oil and it'll all be matching, and the grain on this is just a little bit nicer to look at. So we cut our pieces down to length and install them using our 63mm nails.
That is the OSB complete. We're going to get our rubber up here and we're going to roll it out. We ain't going to install it yet, we're going to let it rest.
No, the rubber hasn't had a hard day at work. It basically means we're going to let all of the creases settle out where it's been wrapped up in a bag. So we unwrap it, roll it out on the roof. Jack makes this look super difficult, but it isn't really that much of a hard job. And then we leave it on the roof, pinned down, so it can settle out.
We've temporarily pinned the roof down. We're going to let that settle.
And that's about all we've got time for in this video.
But make sure you catch us on the next one where we're going to be wrapping this build up. But for now, I will see you later.
Love you, bye.